I think something happened in the 1700s and the 1800s that has been systematically erased from our memory banks. I truly believe something happened within the 1700s and the 1800s, and we just done totally forgot about it. And whatever took place and happened is detrimental in us understanding where we at today. If you look at old pictures that was taken in the 1800s, you see certain cities around the world to where it's pictures being taken of, let's say, downtown Chicago, but ain't no people in the picture. You see certain type of architecture that, if we believe the history we were taught, back then they didn't have the tools or the engineering capacity to build this type of architecture. If what they teach us in history class is true, all right. What do I mean by that? Let me show you real quick. On the screen right here, what you're seeing is an image, a map image of Grand Tartary. Now, I don't know how many of y'all are familiar with the Tartarian Empire, but this is what Wikipedia and mainstream, media would call a conspiracy theory about this great or grand society or civilization that was in power not too long ago and then just wiped out of our memory banks. We don't know nothing about it. Like it let them tell it didn't exist. It's just a whole lot of BS and things of that nature. But as you can see right here on this old ass map that I'm showing you right here on the screen, you can see right there where Russia and China and Asia period is here. It says Grand Tartary. Now this empire, they say, was a vast empire, and it had influence basically all over the world. Now, ask yourself this, now, because you got eyes just like I got eyes. If you go look at the architecture in Rome, in Greece, don't you see that type of architecture pretty much everywhere where there's prominent set? You definitely see it over here. All of our state capitals had that type of architecture. Those big cathedrals that we see in Europe and in Russia and things of that nature, we have those same type of buildings using the same type of architecture over here and in other parts of the world. Now, here's my thing. As advanced as we are right now, why aren't we mimicking that type of architecture? On the screen right now, what you see, this is a picture from Chicago in the 1800s. Look at those buildings. Look at those buildings. That's not in Chicago anymore. But look at the architecture. Now, you mean to tell me, from what history told us, that the people back in the 1800s at that time, they didn't have the tools or the engineering capacity to be able to build things like that. So, how are those buildings in existence? If you start researching, you'll come up with the World Fair that Chicago hosted. I think it was called the Columbia Festival or something like that. And they say they built this whole immaculate village, if you will. I don't know, shit, man, it was huge, 60,000 acres or something like that. They built it just to invite everybody there, like sort of like an Olympic Games or some shit. And then they just demolished it 2, 3 months afterwards, just because it was there for show. Now, my thing is, why would you put that much effort into something just to demolish it? All right, so I'm gonna give you an example. I remember when the Olympic Games came to Atlanta, and I remember how much work the city of Atlanta put into hosting the Olympic Games. Atlanta ain't tie down all that shit. So what makes me think that Chicago back then, when they were supposedly in more of a dire situation than we are right now, would build such immaculate buildings as we're seeing right now, just to tear them down? Nah, that don't make sense. Now, see, this is just Chicago, right? I mean, look at the architecture right here, y'all. Even if you want like seriously, let's go to another picture. Look at the architecture right here, man. Look how massive that is. Look how massive that is. Where are the people? You got one person right here in this picture. Where are all the people at? I'm serious. Like, think about it. It's like there had to be, to me, it's like it was a reset of some sort that went on at that time. Look at this picture. Look how massive these buildings are. And look how few people are out here in the streets. The math just ain't mathing. We know how metropolises are set up. It's people in the streets everywhere. Everywhere. But you mean to tell me we got buildings this big, built so immaculately, and we don't have enough people? Why would you need buildings this big if it wasn't that many people? Think about what I'm saying, y'all. Look at this. Now you see a bunch of people here. World's Columbian Exposition. It's a bunch of people. They came from, millions of people came from all over the world. Look at this architecture. We can't even build stuff like this today. To me, it seems like they're trying to hide something. And again, think about it. When you done did something that you ain't got no business doing, what the first thing you want to do to ensure that nobody finds out? Get rid of all evidence. But you can't get rid of all the evidence because you want to have a trophy to celebrate and remember what it is that you accomplished. You see what I'm saying? So some of the buildings had to stand. See, don't that look like a Capitol building right there? Now, if you go to Montgomery, you see a Capitol building that look like that. You go to Atlanta, you see a Capitol building that look like that. You go to DC, you see a Capitol building like that look like that. You go to Rome, you go to Greece, you see buildings that look like that. You go all around the world, you're gonna see buildings that look like that. You're gonna see bridges that look like that. Okay? Look at this. Marvelous historical Chicago photos. Look at that architecture. See, to me, the point that I'm trying to make is I think that these buildings were here way before 1800. All right, I really do. I think that these buildings were here way before 1800, but they're not telling us the complete story. They're just not telling us the complete story. It seems like the cities were wiped out of the population and then repopulated by somebody. That's just me. I just think that it's a huge chunk of information that we're missing. Like when they tell us about the Revolutionary War, they said we were fighting the British because we didn't want to pay taxes to the crown, right? But what if it wasn't actually the British crown? What if it was a Tartarian empire that we were actually going up against? We don't know. We just go off of what they give us. That's history. That's the documentation that we have. Those are the receipts we're able to pull up. But I'm the type of person that like to question everything. Cause some in this timeline don't add up to me. Period. Like if we had if civilization had the capacity to build monolithic structures like, let me find a picture here that I can really just show you like this, right? If they had the capacity to build this, why ain't we still building it now? And then you got to think this the 1800s. Technology really ain't take off for us over here in America as far as how we identify with the timeline until 1950-ish, somewhere up in there. So something going on. All right. Now with that, I got a video that I want to break down and I want to react to that's going to go into further detail as far as what I'm talking about right now. Cause I'm being honest with y'all, like this might be the mother of all rabbit holes. Seriously speaking, this Tartarian Empire, this mud flood shit, what happened in the 1800s, like you got to have all the pieces to the puzzle to be able to put the puzzle together and see the big picture, right? So that's all I'm trying to do right now. Just looking at this and trying to get a clear understanding because when I'm looking at it, I'm like, whoa, this is some deep shit. I've been studying this for a minute, but I just never really dived into it, because it's so much that we got to get caught up to speed on while we living in this information age. But now, I've circled back, and this is very intriguing to me. So, this video that I am about to react to right here, this is from, I want to say the channel is Stargate Journeys or something like that. The dude that is being interviewed has a YouTube channel. JT follows JC. He's gonna go into depth because he's been doing this for a while, and I think it's a very intriguing video. And I just encourage you to just sit back, listen to it. I intervene here and there. I'm gonna try to hold back my comments as much as possible, but if he does get to something that I need to expound on, I will do that. So let's just get into the video without further ado.
Old world architecture, Tartaria, mud flood. So people that may not know anything about this topic, start out giving us like a 10,000 foot, 30,000 foot view of this topic and what it means when you say Tartaria, mud flood. And then I want to get into asking you about several specific sites that you have made videos about. And we'll just go deep into this crazy world of old world architecture.
Yeah. So basically, Tartaria. Well, the interesting part about Tartaria is it literally was an empire that's like for some reason they never told us about. Now, some people will project that onto every old world, like very impressive building, like stone building in like major cities, and so they'll say that's evidence of this civilization. It's called Tartaria, and it's everywhere. Well, that's not exactly correct. I think that what Tartaria was, like I said, is actually was in Russia, like modern day Russia. That's where this empire was. Now, it's interesting, like, good question is like, why don't they tell us about that? But if you see old maps, it's funny, even I got this map behind me up over here. It actually, Tartaria is on it. Places like Tartaria and like Hyperborea, like these are on old maps. And it's like, so the question is, why is it on there? But what a lot of people attribute to like these very impressive buildings, kind of almost like good examples of this would be like Washington, D.C. Like, oh, that's weird. They built that place like Rome. That's kind of interesting. And you see all these massive stone buildings like, wow. So then in this time in like the 1800s, they built very, very impressive things with not a lot of technology. And so I think that some people have asked questions about that. And then you start to look in the timeline of when these buildings were built and you're like, some of these buildings were built like in a year. and we're supposed to believe that the people with like horses and buggies, like literally went to the quarry, got all the stones, they carved these things with the hand, by hand with chisels.
Look how big that door is, man. That's a doorway. And look how small the people are in that doorway, right? Just look at how
And
small they are.
everything's per
Look how small the people are. Why would you need a doorway that goddamn big for people that's that damn small? That's that. Leave it in the comments. Please tell me your explanation of why you think you need archways and doorways that are that big. And I just want to remind you that David did fight Goliath, and Goliath was what? A giant. And the book does say that there were giants back in those days. To me, that would explain why you need a doorway that damn big. But I'm gonna digress.
perfect, and it's more impressive than the things we make now. It's like I said, it's very similar in the way that like they would try to say that the stuff in Egypt was done with copper tools. And you're like, well, no, I don't see that. Like, you know what I mean? So like, it's almost like, well, this is all they had, so this is what they used. And you're like, no, there's a third option. We don't know what they did. And I think in the same way that we ask questions about this, where like the timeline makes no sense of when some of these buildings were done. So, and there's evidence that very similar architecture, very in the same kind of way that you could say there's pyramids all over the place. That speaks to a worldwide civilization, a connectivity that we weren't told about. I mean, that's what makes sense to most. And in the same way, there's buildings that what you would consider maybe old world, or maybe even some people would say they're colonial style. And they're in places like Japan and China and India and places they don't really belong. We have in our minds a certain type of architecture that's in these places, but no, that literally this kind of like Roman-esque Greek style is everywhere in the whole world. And so some people have theorized like that, yeah, there is this cover up of this civilization that was likely very advanced, more advanced than we are, that was in our recent past. And then some people question like when did this empire, whatever it was, or whatever this civilization was, when did it fall? And that's when people say around maybe like the late 18th century, maybe early 19th century, there's people call something the mud flood. And if you guys aren't sure what that is, there's things buried around the whole world. And I'm sure Derek can speak to this, where it's not just ancient stuff, it's modern stuff, where like modern cities have all kinds of evidence that their buildings are buried up. Like the first floors of lots of buildings are buried. Like literally you go to like a major city and you'll see windows, like if a road's kind of on a slant, built on a slant, the building's on a slant, the windows disappear. No, like nobody would build the building like that. The street literally starts to cover up the windows, or like every.
I want to speak on that. See, that mud flood, and I know it's a lot of people out there that's trying to dismiss the mud flood, but I'm going to be honest with you. Like, the mud flood makes a whole lot of sense to me. All right, so I'm going to tell you why it make a whole lot of sense. If every civilization on the planet has a story in their history about a flood, the biblical flood, right? That can't be a coincidence. Now, here's the thing this is what I think about this mud flood that we're talking about. If the whole world were flooded, or if the mass majority of the world went through a massive flood, wouldn't there be a massive amount of mud? I At my house, my backyard floods every time I get a heavy rain. And what happens is it get muddy. Don't get so much. It don't get as muddy as it used to because I done got the grass growing good and that soaks up a lot of that water. But at the same time, you can see, well, a lot of the dead grass and debris that was in the ground or whatnot, it floods out and it goes to my front yard. It goes to my curb in front of the house. So if you're just using common sense, if you put a lot of water on the ground gets muddy. So if we're having a flood of biblical proportions, to me it only makes sense that you're gonna have a mud flood after that. Because it's gonna take time for the ground to become solid again. But during the time that it's becoming solid, that mud is going to float. It's not gonna, the dirt that was flooded out is not gonna remain in the same place. And again, think about it. Water is gonna find the level. Water gonna level out. And if the dirt or the ground is filled with water and therefore it becomes mud, mud is going to do the same thing up until the point to where it becomes stagnant and solid enough to where it just rests where it is. Just think about that. You know what I mean?
Every kind of old world building has like stairs up to the first floor. But what it seems obvious when you actually can see it, that's not the first floor. That's like likely the second floor because the first floor is underground. So like you have these first floors that are almost halfway basements, but they're really not. And that's like a good example is like my hometown. I'm near Norfolk, Virginia. It's 7 feet over sea level. They don't build basements around here because they would flood. I mean, because the place floods like crazy. But if you go downtown and you'll find basements, but they're not really basements all over the place there. And so like what do you do with that? So why would they do that when they had less technology, build basements? Did they not know it flooded back then? Or maybe the conditions were different. And then, so then you see that in modern examples, but like when you see like the Moai statues in Easter Island, it wasn't almost until recently they were like, hey, guess what? They have bodies. Well, yeah, they have bodies. Like they're buried like 20 feet under the ground in some cases with their statue. What's that one famous gate in Iraq? There's a picture from like 1850 where it's like the gate was like the gate's like it's got those cherub looking things with the beard, and
Right.
the gate is like 25 feet tall. And like literally they show it and it's 100% buried under the ground. And the Roman ruins, places in Rome, they're all buried. And the thing is, it's like, this is a worldwide phenomenon. And I don't necessarily have answers for it. We got our theories on what that means, but I just think it's insane that there's really no narrative like how all these things got buried. Like the people don't understand like when Roman ruins had to be excavated. Like even the biblical cities, like in like the book of Revelation, the all the cities in Turkey, like when they say there was excavations to find ruins, like literally there's like Sardis, Turkey, there's a real famous picture where they had dug 20 feet under the ground and there's like this massive column under there. Okay, so how did that happen? And so all that being said, there's lots of questions about that. And then so we continue to ask questions. And I think the more you kind of like start pulling at that thread of the sweater, it reeks of a cover up. We're told that the camera was invented like around 1820-ish, I think. But the earliest pictures we have of like big cities, like specifically like in Europe, there's a lot of good pictures of like St. Petersburg in Russia. There's like Dresden in Germany. And you have these massive, massive cities. And there's nobody on the streets. There's mud everywhere, which, I think a lot of people would probably say, well, they didn't have paved roads. It's like, yes, they did. I mean, look at the buildings. They weren't walking around in mud and walking into some immaculate building. It's like, it makes no sense. So then you're like, so what happened there? It looks very eerie when you see these pictures. So I don't know. It seems like people have kind of theorized like that when you hear about all these places being founded in a certain time or buildings being founded, it's like, is that literally just kind of almost like a tongue in cheek? Like, yeah, well, they found this building at some point, and then maybe somebody claimed it. They uncovered some of it, and maybe people took credit for things that they didn't actually build.
You had a video, a short, or I don't know if it was a short, but it was a video on Instagram I saw where you're talking a lot about this. It's 1850s, the 1850 massive buildings. And you talk about how in a lot of these photos, there's little to barely any people in them, like you said. But then talk about the orphan connection, because in this video, you break down how you see photos of hundreds of thousands of orphans, or you give stats of there was hundreds of thousands of orphans back then. Yet there was also hundreds of thousands of adults in insane asylums
Yeah.
in these crazy looking buildings.
Okay, so the overall theory is like that I came up with was there was some kind of cataclysm. Was it man-made? Was it act of God back then? And it seemed like there was some kind of a reset. And that's what people would just say. There was some kind of reset back in the early 19th century, maybe late 18th century. And so what's interesting, again, you think about like 1776. There's a revolution in America, there's a revolution in France right after that time. There's wars all over the place around this time. Like the 1800s was like the craziest time like in the whole world. Like every
And so that's my point. Like we know what they tell us in history, but we don't really know who we were actually fighting against or who they were fighting against at that time. Like that shit was going on all around the world, everywhere. So it seems like whatever this war was, it was way bigger than what they tell us. Like we we know it in our country as the Revolutionary War, right? In another country, it could be called something else. But 9 times out of 10, it's gonna be a war that was fought around that same time period. You see what I'm saying? Around that same time period, 1776. Because I always had a question in my head was like, okay, if we fought alongside, the colonizers at that time in 1776 in the Revolutionary War, why would they double back 30 years later and then fight the natives, us, that was here on this land in hopes of conquering and taking over our land? That didn't make sense to me. But if it wasn't, if the War of 1776, what isn't exactly the way they depict it out to be, things start to make a little more sense. Was it a situation of a land grab? Was it a situation of a manifest destiny just trying to take as much as you possibly can to conquer? I mean, these are questions that we have to ask. I don't have the answer to them. You know what I mean? That's why we diagnosing the video. I don't have the answer, but I'm the type to question everything. However, I can entertain a thought without accepting.
everything was every major city was on fire. There's all kinds of crazy stuff. And that's what I was saying. So when you see these pictures, and there's lots of them, of just like these cities that just look completely just uninhabited. Like you couldn't take a picture of like a major city like that and there'd be no people on it. Like, what do they tell everyone to stay inside? Now, some people will say, oh, that's because of exposure. No, no, no. That wasn't because of exposure, because if there was people walking around, there'd be little blurs, but there's not. There, like, and it almost feels like that the picture was taken with some intent to show this is crazy. Check out this city. There's nobody in it. And then so shortly after that, there's a story of the orphan trains. So I believe in America, it was like from like 1860 to 1929. There's 250,000 kids going on orphan trains. Like this, like I said, this is when you go down the rabbit hole and you're like, that is the weirdest thing. Because I've heard people make videos about that, and I said, there's no way that could be true. That doesn't make sense to me. Like 250,000 kids. So you got to think about it. We're told worldwide there was 1 billion people in 1800, like worldwide. So you think about 250,000 around that time, multiply that number by about 12, and that would maybe be equivalent to what it would be like today. Like, you could only even imagine that many kids who have no parents and they're just being shipped around the country. And this is just in the United States. So I believe this is a worldwide phenomenon too. So my question was, like, you start to see no people in certain pictures. Then later on, you start to see people, like cities like Paris and London, and everybody you've seen in these pictures, it looks like people are tourists. They're all dressed like aristocrats. Everybody's dressed to the nines. They got top hats, they got canes.
Right.
The women are all dressed up in their big dresses. And so who's working in the factories? Not those people. Who's working in the fields? I don't think that those people are working in the fields or the factories. So who's doing all these jobs that like they would need people to do. And I believe that's where the orphans came in.
See, that's my thing. Like when you see a city, you see these pictures, and I just showed you a few. He's speaking on them, and they're gonna show a few in this video. Where are all the people at? But then when you do see a picture of the people, it's like even with the World Fair pictures, it's like millions of people came out to this World Fair or whatnot. You think they just all went back? No, it seems like to me there was some type of reset. There was some type of, I dare to call it genocide because I don't know, but it seems like there was some type of cleansing of people of in a certain place, and then a repopulation with the kids. And he's talking about the orphan trains right now, and we've all seen pictures of kids back in the 1800s putting in a lot of work and this, that, and the third out there in society. However, doesn't it make sense now why we had to come up with these child labor laws? See, if that wasn't the case, if it wasn't the case that you had a massive amount of kids out here working, why would we have to come up with child labor laws in the first place? Think about it. I mean, just from a moral compass standpoint, it's something in your genetic makeup to make you understand that it's certain things that kids shouldn't be doing. You see what I'm saying? Working in a damn factory, like, come on, bro. That ain't right. I don't need nobody to tell me that that's right. I don't want my daughter or my son at 9, 10, 11, 12 years old working in a coal mine. That's crazy talk. You see what I'm saying? So we don't need that. Like in our moral and genetic makeup, we know that's wrong. However, back in the gap, that wasn't the case. They will had these children working. Now you got to come up with the child labor laws or whatnot. This, that, and the third. Like when you just start looking at stuff start to become more stuff starts to become more less a conspiracy and more of something to actually think about and contemplate.
So you have all these orphans getting shipped around, and then you start to see at the same time, you start seeing these crazy pictures of like kids working in factories and working in fields, like kids that are working big machinery in factories that they don't seem big enough to even operate. Like they're standing on boxes to do things. And, I'm sure some people would say, oh, well, that's because they didn't have child labor laws. Of course they didn't. But I don't think that if you're trying to make money, I get it. You could pay a kid less. But a kid is not producing like a man could, right? Like, I mean, you'd have to babysit the kids too, basically. It's like you can't they just turn them loose in the factory? Like, that's not efficient by any means. But the crazy thing is, like, so the question is, so where did these kids come from? Well, you could say there's wars going on at the time. There is. You could also say that there's fires happening in these cities. Sure. But also at the very same time, they're from, I want to say in 1900, there was 150,000 people in insane asylums in America. And people are getting locked up for stuff like religious extremism and very weird things. They're just being put into nut houses. And so I started to theorize maybe those are the parents. Those kids were taken away from these parents and they were put into, basically the workforce. And I believe those kids are the first ones who are basically getting taught like in the modern school system, and they were getting taught a false history, and they're not allowed to talk about what happened before. And I think maybe the people who did talk about what happened before, maybe those are the people in the nut houses who got their kids taken away. So they can't actually tell you what actually happened. And I'm sure you know, Derek, that when you start to try to find old books, it's not easy to find old books, like books before 1850. And when you do find them, there's weird stuff in them. Like there's lots of weird anomalies that we're not taught about. And I think that, again, it reeks of a cover up. There's also evidence in like these fairs. Like, well, you have the World Fairs. Before you get into that, like places like Coney Island, they have these weird exhibits with like incubator babies. And it's like, what is going on? Like, you know, you have like the ads for like Cabbage Patch Kids and stuff like that. And you're like, I don't know what to do with this. It seems like if you don't look into it, you'd.
Did he say ads for Cabbage Patch Kids? Now, if you in my generation, you remember them Cabbage Patch Kids. If you were female out there and you my age, you had a Cabbage Patch baby. You remember them dolls? But what he's telling me right now is, or what he's just disclosed to all of us, is that Cabbage Patch actual babies was something real. Now, why would they call these babies Cabbage Patch? Like they just came up like in a garden of cabbages or whatnot. And he also dropped the jewel with talking about incubators. Like what really took place? Are we really diving down a rabbit hole to where we can actually fathom an invasion of some sort? I'm just saying, I'm not saying that's what it is. I'm just saying that something took place, y'all. Period. And you got a extreme amount of orphans. Orphans. Where they parents at? Then you got people being locked up, put into crazy asylums or whatnot, simply because they went against the narrative. Now think about it. Think about our parents, our ancestors, if you will. You remember how they don't even want to talk about certain things in the past? They consider it like taboo. They don't even want to give you actual history of what they went through or what their parents went through or what their parents' parents went through. Like they just choose to stay away from it. Could he be on to something right here? I'm just saying. I ain't saying he is and I ain't saying he ain't, but he could be on to something.
Say there's no merit to any of it, but there is. Like there was a weird time happening, and the real question is why. We're not really taught why. You know, like if you see like a famous old picture of like St. Petersburg, it's as big as it is today. You know, like these cities, these
Where
major
are
cities
all the
all around the
people?
world. When you see
Where are the people? As big as this complex is, as big as we can see this city, we see how big this city is. Where are the people?
early pictures of them, they're as big as they are today. And so these places don't look like they're on the rise. They just look like they've got tons of infrastructure there that are built for cities that they could have millions of people in them. But there's obviously not millions of people, or at least I don't believe that there was. And so the buildings were repurposed later to do other things. That's why it's funny, like we were saying, that you have in America back in those days, there was thousands of orphanages. Like there's like the orphanages as we knew it then don't exist. Obviously, we know that there's ways for kids to be adopted and stuff like that, but that's not like wholesale orphanages where these places literally look like castles in America. Same thing where you have insane asylums that look like castles. Then you even have prisons that look like castles all around the country. And so just knowing like how things are now, why don't we build things that look like castles anymore? we don't.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like the idea that we ever did, like you would ever build a castle and then decide to turn it into a prison or an insane asylum. Again, so we don't really have insane asylums anymore. They don't exist anymore. Orphanages like those don't exist anymore.
I had never really thought about it, but you got my brain spinning there, thinking about the insane asylums and how, yeah, today, I mean, obviously there's, mental disorders are real and, it's all over, but we don't see insane asylums today like you were showing in these photographs and the stats that you shared. again from the 1800s. Didn't you say it was hundreds of thousands of people, if that's accurate, in these insane asylums?
It was in the year 19.
Hold on, man. Look at that building right there, man. That's a fucking castle, y'all. And they made that into an insane asylum. Like, first of all, why would you build an insane asylum to look like this? We done watched enough movies. We done all went to history class when we was in school and things of that nature. This is a castle. Can't nobody argue that point. Period. This is a castle. They refurbished this building to be a insane asylum? A mental hospital? Are you shitting me? Telling you, man, it's something. Look, something in the water don't smell right. I'm just saying.
1800, there was 150,000 people in insane asylums in America, and now there's zero. So like that seems, you know what I mean? Like that seems like a big, like if we went from that to that, I mean that seems like a pretty drastic. It's funny too when you think about the way things supposedly used to be, the way we're taught things were. You would have thought back then, this is the beginning of America, right? The land of the free. Well, I mean, when would we ever just allow people just to be locked up because they were religious extremists and stuff like that? It's like, I thought that was part of the First Amendment. Like, do you get a court to sign off and this person's crazy enough to just to take all the rights away? Like, that seems like I don't know, that seems kind of messed up. And you just, like, we're taught a certain way about how this place grew. But when you actually, like I said, when you actually start to examine some of it, it really just makes no sense. Again, like that, you think about a lot of these buildings are like public buildings. But we're told that in this country, they threw tea in a harbor because they didn't want to pay taxes anymore. But then who funded all these public buildings that are all over the place? Like a lot of these buildings were created before there was like income tax and stuff like that in these places. So who,
Right.
like, who was investing all the time and the money into building a very elaborate, detailed, beautiful building, and then order to take people, you take their rights away and shove them into these places, not criminals, people they deemed insane. By who?
Yeah, so it sounds like you're saying they weren't in
Look at that. West Virginia Hospital for the Insane. 1889. Look at that, y'all. So who built that building? Because we ain't have income tax at that point. So the taxpayer dollars ain't pay for that. So who funded it? Or was it already there?
the insane asylums necessarily because of mental disorders or drugs or whatever. It might have been a more nefarious system of lawfare that was just condemning these people to their fate, right?
Well, yeah, possibly. The question is like, so some people would ask, like, how could some of these things that I'm saying, how could they be true without people saying it? Well, that's a pretty good reason that you could do it. It's like, you imagine if, you think about like World War II era in Germany. Well, how come nobody spoke up about that thing? It's like, because their neighbors spoke up about it, and you know what happened to them? Nobody heard from them again. And so, like, what incentive it is, and it's like, it's not like we're on the, they didn't have the internet back then, at least I don't think so. So, like, if something happened to your neighbor, it's like, who are you even gonna go tell? You can't tell the state. I mean, if the state is the one who's doing some of these things, like, what are you supposed to do?
Let's talk about some of this World Fair architecture and photos. You mentioned the World Fair and some of the anomalies with it. I've seen some of the videos you made and photos. What's going on with these old World Fairs?
I think that's some of the pictures. I think they're explained as like these things were just pop-up events, like almost in the similar way that, okay, so if Chicago, like big cities like Chicago, Philadelphia, St. Louis, San Francisco, they'll have these things called world fairs or international fairs, or even some of them are like centennial celebrations of like America and all this kind of stuff. And we're told it was kind of like the Olympics, where they would get these fairs to these certain cities and they would build all this infrastructure for people to come for like a year, like, through most of the year, and they'd come visit these places. Like literally a place like Chicago, They said there was like millions of visitors, millions. Okay, so again, this is 1893. Is I guess they had the Columbia exhibition in Chicago. And if you guys have seen these pictures, it looks like what you'd imagine
Look at
Rome
that,
in all
man.
its glory.
Look at that,
It's
man.
like the most epic looking place.
Look at that, man. Look at that. And you mean to tell me they just tore all that down after the fact? Again, man, Atlanta. I remember when Atlanta had the Olympics in Atlanta, and they built Atlanta up. Atlanta today, in all its glory, wouldn't be what it is if it wasn't for the 1996 Olympics. They didn't tear all that shit down. So why would these folks back then, and they don't suppose to be as technologically savvy as we are today, why would they put all that effort into building something as immaculate as that and then blow it up? Make it make sense, y'all. And again, as big and as beautiful as all this, what a fucking people. Bruh, if this was Chicago today, bro, all the damn walkways what we seeing right now would be flooded, bro. It would be flooded with people. It'll look like Times Square. It'll look like any other metropolitan area, metropolis city in America, flooded with people. But it looked like downtown Phoenix City. Hardly nobody.
Places they got Roman looking statues. The buildings are huge. So we're told in I think it was 1876 would I guess was the 100 years of America. They had a World Fair in Philadelphia. They built the biggest building in the whole world for this fair. 20 acres is like the size of this building. Well, we're told that all this stuff was temporary. So like they built these crazy things and then they just tore them down. Like that doesn't make any sense. Again, we're talking about a people that should have less tools to do this kind of stuff. They don't have the heavy equipment to do it. So they're going to build these very elaborate buildings. Like, and when you see them, they are very elaborate. They are very massive, like columns, very detailed stone work. They'll claim, some of the people who are saying that these are temporary, they'll say, oh, it's just plaster. What's funny enough is that I'm in construction. My family's been in construction for a long time. Even if they were temporary by their definition, they would say, oh, well, they're only made of like wood and plaster and metal lath and this. And I'm like, do you know that's what they make stuff of now? Like those are not temporary structures they make now. It's like the only reason you say they're temporary is because supposedly they tore them down afterwards. But like you don't build a building that's as big as the ones we're talking about. And then you have millions of people going in and out of these places in order for them to be temporary. And if they were temporary, they would still have to be strong enough to not fall down. Plaster back in those days would have been a cement-based plaster, right? So it's still really heavy. And what you'd had to have to support all that weight, steel frames. So even if they weren't stone, they would not be temporary. They would not technically be still. I mean, like I said, they would only be temporary because if you decided to destroy it later, but not temporary like this is not like a Hollywood set. This is not something that you could just walk behind. There's nothing there. There's pictures from the inside of these places too. And yes, they have steel frames. These buildings look like they're made of stone. And not only that, they have age. So they built the biggest building in the whole world in Philadelphia in 1876. They tore it down afterwards. So in 1893, Chicago built a building that was almost twice as big, or it might even twice. I think actually they might have said it was 44 acres on the inside. And then they tore it down afterwards. Okay, so we're taught like a certain view of how they would have lived back then. Like we're supposed to be like the advanced people, but we could not comprehend doing that. I don't think anybody could. Like who would put that much effort in? And these exhibitions had like 200 buildings for these things. So we're just talking about like examples of them. They're all over the place. there is a real good example, and I read this. If you guys have ever seen John Levi, he makes good content on YouTube, and he exposes a lot of the old world stuff. He did a good video about San Francisco, and so they had a midwinter fair there, and I think it was might be 1894. Well, there's evidence that there was actually this was a yearly thing they did there, because there was a newspaper article from 1893 saying that they were advertising for this thing, and we're told that they just built this thing like in 6 months. He breaks down all the costs it would cost, and again, not only that, guys, that we're told electricity was brand new in these places. The whole places were lit up. We're told like people like Tesla would have just had him and a couple of helpers, and they would have wired every one of these buildings. Like you see the pictures of Chicago, it's all lit up. Pictures of San Francisco, it's all lit up. You know what I'm saying? Like, does that make sense to anybody else? I mean, because it doesn't make sense to me that, and especially if you could make a place look like that. Because when you see the pictures of Chicago, you're thinking like, if you could make it look like that temporarily, why wouldn't you make it look like that permanently? Because it looks awesome.
Facts.
So like, so
Yeah.
what's the rub? I think to me, maybe it was possible that they put on these expos or these fairs before they decided to destroy some certain of these structures. The funny part is in Chicago and also in San Francisco, they say that these buildings were temporary, but sometimes they didn't destroy them, and they find out they're actually made of stone. Like I think there's a famous museum of arts museum in Chicago that was supposedly built for this expo, but it's not made of temporary materials. It's made of stone, like the rest of them look like they are.
So you're theorizing that possibly they weren't made for these world fairs in this crazy little amount of time. They were already there. The fairs just said they were built in a crazy amount of time, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's evidence on old maps that places like San Francisco, we're told that San Francisco wasn't even discovered until like the 1870s, or no, the 1770s by like the Spanish. But you see, there's actually a map from I think in the 1500s that San Francisco is on the map. Chicago, there's a place called Chilaga that's over in that area. And so we're told like both those cities didn't become cities like we know them until like the mid 1800s. So why would those things ever been on the map if not for something there? Like San Francisco is probably one of the best examples of it. And I think most of the West Coast cities are really good examples, because we're taught like that Lewis and Clark didn't even go across the Mississippi until like 1803. From like 1803 to 1806, they go exploring what's west. And can you only even imagine like how crazy that sounds? Like, can you imagine saying, Derek, I want you to go across the Mississippi, and like what we're taught about like what America must have looked like back then. Just go look for stuff. Like as vast as this country is, with forests and all this stuff, it's like you can imagine like what really. And then
That's a good
that
point.
was the beginning of the 1800s.
That's a good point. Like, why would you just be like, all right, man, I just want you to go out there and look for stuff? Like, we would talk back then, early 1800s, like, none of that stuff out west was actually civilized. Like, it wasn't nothing but forests, trees, and coyotes, and shit like that, right? It only makes more sense if they knew that all this shit was already built and structured and set up. Like, it was a whole empire here. See what I'm saying? Like, it was already here, it was already established. See, I've been saying that for a while. Like, I just think that, man, it was already some shit already in place by the ancestors. But to rewrite the narrative, you got to destroy the old timeline in order to create a new timeline. Allegedly. I'm just saying. I'm just speculating right here. I'm spitballing. But kind of makes sense.
And so by the middle, you have a city like Chicago looks like it does today. San Francisco looks like it does today. What? Because there's a gold rush. Well, it's funny because San Francisco is like, that's where they always talk about the 49ers, that they went over there. But it's like 50 miles from like any real like place you would actually try to find gold. It does, like I said, the timeline does not make sense in what we would have known, because I don't think that Like I said, with any kind of examination, it's like, really? So we're taught like cowboys just went out to these places? Okay, so if that was the case, who did all the central planning and laid these cities out like that they are now? Built underground parts of these cities. Where did they get all the stone and the brick to do all this stuff? Because they wouldn't have the factories when the first people were going out there. But yet all these places are, yeah, I think Chicago, or was it San Francisco? This is how crazy it is. They say between like 1830s or maybe 1840 and like, I want to say like 1890, it had 6 major fires and 1 earthquake, one major earthquake, where the place had to be rebuilt over and over again. Those were some resilient people, that's for sure.
Let's talk about Fort Jefferson. You put out a video of this recently that was very insightful. It's this interesting looking star fort, 75 miles off the coast of Florida. Tell us about the anomalies surrounding it and why you think there's more to its history than we've been told.
Here's the conventional story of it. I think there was something called, after the War of 1812, they had these I think the first and second and third systems to like protect the country. You know, so they were saying like there was issues with the British attacking the coast during those times. So they were making certain types of fortifications. So in the third system, supposedly, they built 42.
So pay attention. He just said after the War of 1812. Now, the War of 1812 was basically the Creek Indian Nation against everybody. That's basically what it was. It was the big Indian tribe, which was the Creek Indian Nation, that was downhill southeast of what we now call America. The Mississippi, all that, like that was us against our newfound allies. Make it make sense, and then the British as well, right? So big beef. But once they won that war, and in that war, we had to pay them an astronomical amount of money simply because they said that they had to spend all this money in the war and they needed to be reimbursed. So now, if we don't really actually have that type of money to pay them in this treaty of Ghent, if you will, they're going to seize property. They're going to seize land grab. Now, they say that they had to fortify their coastlines and this, that, and the third. This is where he going with this. They ain't have to fortify shit. This fort that they like to call it is one of them star forts, and it was already there. But let me digress and let him tell the story.
2 forts. It was funny. I was actually just reading up on it to refresh myself on it. Congress designated like $800,000 to build all these forts. 42 forts. Okay. Now here's the crazy part: is when you actually look into these places.
Yeah, that's crazy in itself. Hold on.
Fort Jeff.
That's crazy in itself. $800,000 to build 42 forts. Really? That's what we talking about. Look at this fort right here, y'all. Look at this. Look at this. That one right there by itself is $800,000. If not, shit, 5 times that amount. So but they tell us anything and we just believe it because they say it. And I ain't, like, again, I have no verifiable proof that what I'm saying is true or what he's saying is true, but question everything, people. Them folks ain't build that shit, man. That right there, it was already there. But I'm gonna let him finish up his story.
Jefferson is the one that I remember talking to my dad. My dad was always real skeptical of any of the conspiracies I talked about with him. But when I told him about this one, it was really like I could just see the gears turn in his mind. Okay, so here's some of the facts about this place. It's, yes, about 70-ish miles off the coast. I think it might be 70 miles from Key West. So it's on the Gulf side of Florida. And it's on this place called, I guess it's called Dry Tortugas. It's these little islands. What it really looks like is like little sandbars. It doesn't look like there's a whole lot there. And like this fort is over there. Yeah, and you said it's a star fort. It's built like where it encompasses like this whole island. It's almost like the edges of the fort are literally at the edges of the water. And there's 16 million bricks in this place.
Wow.
16 million. And that makes it the largest masonry brick structure in the whole Western Hemisphere. What we're told is that this was built, they built some lighthouse in, I think, the 1820s, but in 1846, they started building this fort. And it took them around, they say it took 30 years to construct. Okay, so you could imagine this. Again, like this is times where like you think wooden ships. Think Pirates of the Caribbean. Like if that's your picture in your mind. They're taking pallets and pallets of bricks. And back then, I don't even believe they had like full capacity to have factories that made bricks. I think they still had to make them mostly by hand. There's 16 million bricks. And
look at that, man.
Here's the interesting part about this island. There's no fresh water there.
So hold on, they ain't got no fresh water. They have to make bricks by hand at that time because they don't have no, brick yards or brick factories that can actually, mass produce the bricks. And then they have to take wooden ships, like from the Pirates of the Caribbean, and ship 16 million bricks 70 miles off the coast of Florida. Come on, y'all. Come on, man. What we talking about?
It seems like to me, this is me, a skeptical person. It seems like an odd place because if you were trying to make a fortification that would have any kind of help for the British, you might want to put it like maybe on the other, closer to the coast. Maybe put it like, I don't know, on the other side where the British are coming from the other way. It's kind of like between like Key West and like Cuba. And they say this, of course, this fort was never attacked. Of course, why would it be? Like, why would you even want to take this place? It's just like you said, it's literally like a sandbar with no fresh water. We're told is that they had cisterns and it rained a lot there, so they just got fresh water from the rain. Well, that seems very difficult to build stuff like that, masonry with no fresh water. Like, can you imagine like doing masonry? Don't you have to wash stuff off? They go down to the ocean to wash off their tools all the time. It's preposterous. I mean, that's all I can say is when you actually think about this, like how much time and effort would go into this. Again, it wasn't the biggest masonry structure in the Western Hemisphere then. It still is. So we're taught is that they took them about 30 years to build this. Like toward the end of it, like during the Civil War, they decided to turn it into a prison, even though it supposedly wasn't done. And then shortly after, actually before it was completed, the United States Army abandoned it. Like I think they said they started building it in 1846. It was abandoned by the Army in 1874.
Wow.
And so basically what we're taught it was used for, it was really never used for that. Supposedly it was like maybe there was a harbor there. Well, not a harbor, but they would be a place where like ships would get, I don't know, they get supplies there, even though I don't know why you'd get supplies there since they couldn't make anything there. Like literally the place is, I think it encompasses 26 acres. It makes no logical sense. I don't think so.
26 acres. You're saying it took 30 years to build?
We're taught that it took 30 years to build, but they also but once it was completed, they didn't really ever use it for the things they said they were going to use it for.
Yeah, to me, that's the biggest alarm that goes off in my head is, in back in the day, it would have cost a huge amount to build this. 30 years later, they're going to abandon it because it's, it doesn't have much purpose.
because it makes no sense to have this place out on a sandbar, like I said, with no fresh water. It really, and here's another ridiculous thing they say. They say that they use slave labor to build it, slave labor and prisoners to build this thing. But then when you actually look at the detail of the brickwork, these guys were obviously master masons. There's arches everywhere. The not only that, but the brick style. I guess there's three different types of brick. Basically techniques how you build brick. They use obviously the hardest one, and it's perfect. Like these structures like this are perfect. It
Yeah,
makes
man.
sense to me that
Ain't nobody from the chain gang put them arches up like that, cuz. Like, bro, you just ain't get. Do you know what's in the chain gang? Do you know what's in prison? Like, they don't really have trades and things of that nature. So when you sit here and say you use slave labor or prisoners to build this right here, man, just look at that. Look at how intricate the design is in this. And the thing is that it's standing the test of time. You ain't like you got some discoloration, but you ain't even got no deterioration in these bricks. Like there's nothing chipping off, no nothing. I mean, even the groundwork. Like whoever built this knew exactly what they were doing, and they were damn good at doing what they do. They were true builders, if you will.
this is a cover story. This place was already there because it. Some people have said, and I'm not necessarily married to any one of these theories, but some people have said, what if where it's at, it's on this some sandbar? What if it's interesting that what they call it the Bimini Road is underwater around
Bimini
Florida.
Road.
Some
Yep.
people say that's some kind of evidence of Atlantis. I don't really buy that, but it's interesting that there's something that looks like a man-made structure under the water. What if that place was not so far off the coast back in those days? Because it really makes no sense to put that where it's at if geographically the things are still the same.
Right.
I think there's something amiss. Like, what is it? I'm not sure.
The structure is clearly not of the megalithic, flavor, but it is a massive undertaking with, like you said, detailed arches, elaborate arches. But so you're saying it might be older than when they're telling us it was built. How much older do you think it might be? Are we talking like a couple hundred years, 1,000 years? Any ideas on that?
That's a great question. There's just older. I mean, I guess we don't know. That's what I'm saying. I guess I don't know. It's funny. That's what I was saying. Like I'm sure in the field of research you do, you'll see like stuff like Baalbek, and you'll say, well, that one stone is huge, and those don't really line up with the other ones. So like this probably was done earlier. These smaller stones were likely done later. Yeah. So this doesn't really line up with that because it's stuff that we could do. Like I think like we would say like some of those megaliths and like, yeah, we're saying in Peru, we'd say, I don't think we could do that now. I'm sure we could do something like Fort Jefferson now, I believe. Why would we? We wouldn't. So the real question is like there had to be some kind of a different condition. Something was different about then that it was practical to do it. And I think that the interesting part is, as I mentioned, San Francisco, there's also called Fort Point in San Francisco, and it's right under like basically where the Golden Gate Bridge is. Very similar, and it was supposedly built in like 1850. Again, I think in 1848 there was supposedly like 1,000 people in San Francisco. So they built this fort there, and supposedly this is all based on like they were trying to fortify the United States coast. They picked San Francisco, which again would have been a mining town back then. Like why they would put that there makes no sense. Very similar in the way that it's 3 stories tall. It's got I don't know the exact brick count, but it's a similar structure. The walls are 7 feet thick.
Dang.
Right? 7 feet thick. There's another place I think it's called Fort Morgan in Alabama. And so the funny part is these places were told to be like these. The way they're laid out like stars is supposedly because they could put like cannons and there would be no blind spots where this fort could be attacked. Well, the funny part is if you actually look at like the military history of these forts, they didn't do well in combat. So what they're all the whole purpose is if they are going to attack again, like nobody's attacking the fort in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico. It's easily avoidable. It's 70 miles off the coast. So it's kind of like if a ship would say like,
go around it.
I'm going to go. You got a lot of leeway to go around it on either side.
Now, if it could move, that would be one thing.
Right. If it was like a Death Star, maybe, but like, it's like the Death Star, which is just hanging out in nowhere. And it's like, yeah, let's just not go that part of the Star Wars universe. But this is kind of like in that same way. So why would there's no strategic value of this place other than maybe some people have theorized, oh, well, it's used to stop pirates or something. But again, pirates probably could go around it easily. And it's really the ships that are patrolling the area would be, I don't know, the main deterrent for that kind of thing, I guess. But so the real question is like, so these structures are likely older. And here's something that, again, I read out of that guy John Levi's book. So as I mentioned, I'm kind of in southeastern Virginia, and so we have here, really close to where I'm at, is Jamestown. And if you guys aren't familiar, Jamestown we're told, is the oldest permanent English settlement. But just south of here is Roanoke Island, and so Roanoke Island is where we get the whole mythology of the lost colony, where they established this colony there before Jamestown, I think in like the 1840s, and then I'm not sure how long they were there, but John White was the man who was kind of in charge there. He went back to Great Britain to get supplies, and I guess he came back 3 years later. Kind of took a long time to get there and go back, but whatever. That's neither here nor there. But the interesting part about John White is he did these detailed maps of the area, like pretty accurate, like the way they're drawn. And so he's got this map of the area from 1840. What's fascinating is there's a patch over part of the map. And I guess they did what is it called? Like LiDAR type technique to find out what was under the patch. And what's under the patch is a star. It looks like what's been covered up is a star fort. Okay, so now think about that. So before the first permanent English settlement, there's a map by John White of North Carolina where I guess it's like right where these rivers fork. There is a patch, and under the patch is a star fort. So like a similar structure possibly as the ones we're talking about.
Right.
Maybe it seems to me that they were already here. So that's in the 1500s. So
Any theories you want to share with us about what happened at Roanoke?
well, I mean, before I started to go down this path, I started to think, like, what if it, like the Native Americans always talk about giants and stuff. And I thought, well, what if the lost colony was eaten by cannibalistic giants? I guess that's possible, but I'm starting to wonder how much of the stuff we've been taught about this, if any of it's true. Because again, if there was this advanced civilization that was possibly already here, like what were we told about the things that were like, what are they correct about the things they're telling us? Because it's funny, even like when I was going to school, like in like grade school and stuff, everyone talked about Columbus being the first person to discover America, but there was always people saying, yeah, but the Vikings got here before he did. So even back in those days, it would almost be like the teacher would kind of say, a lot of people think the Vikings were here first. Now it's widely accepted that's true. Okay, so why were they ever pushing this false history? Because there was probably lots of information that was not true. So if they lied about that, I believe they lied about the whole idea of why was America named America. Amerigana Vespucci, literally they named it after some guy's first name, not even the first guy to come here. And again, you don't really discover a place that already exists. Like there's people everywhere.
Thank you.
Right?
I think
I remember hearing Tim Alberino back in the day, and he discussed the idea that no, America was named after Amaru Ka, the plumed serpent. He was what they called him in what we now call South America. He was their god. And of course, he was their, in Quetzalcoatl in North America. I think there's a lot of things about what we've been taught about this place just are not so. Like now I'm trying to peel back the layers, like how much could we have been lied to about that? But I mean, again, you didn't discover a place that has massive pyramids and people that actually have a civilization there. It's like, it's not, like what we're taught. And then we're supposed to believe that Columbus thought this was India. And then he started calling everyone Indians. And then so one day, I guess they figured out it was not India, but they still called them Indians after that. You know what I mean? Like there's one of those kind of things where you're like, we were taught a lot of dumb things, like Benjamin Franklin discovered electricity by flying a kite with a key on it. Isaac Newton discovered gravity by getting hit on the head with an apple.
Talk to him, Joe.
It's almost like, wow, they taught us as kids like mythologies basically that probably aren't true.
And that's a good point to stop at. But before I get out of here, man, I want you to just look at this picture right here, and I'm gonna point something out to you, right? Now, if you can see this picture right here, it seems like you're looking at a structure. You can see something that looks like the Eiffel Tower right here, correct? And then, on the left hand side of that Eiffel Tower, it seems like something that we would consider factories or greenhouses or something today. And you look at the domes that are on top of these facilities. Notice how they're gold, notice how they're copper or whatnot. I truly believe that we were harnessing free energy back then. Like, in order to come up with these structures and to have, the architecture that we had back then, I don't think that we were charging for power, electricity. I think we were harnessing it from the environment or whatnot. And I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of things had to be reset in order to get us into the situation that we in today. But that's a whole nother rabbit hole that we can dive down or whatnot, man. I hope you enjoyed this video. Like I said, this is an interesting topic. Just understanding the history behind the mystery that we call life right now. I think it's fair to say that we have a right to question certain things, and I just ask you to continue to question these things. All right. So with that being said, my name is Keith Daniel. This is Daniel Diagnosis. Like, share, and subscribe. Leave it in the comments, good people. Tell me what you think. Till we meet again, peace.